Welcome back to the Lotus Spark podcast, a podcast where we celebrate Vietnamese women, their stories, their paths to yay, and the incredible resilience that they all demonstrate in various aspects of their own lives. We are all about being able to share stories that aren't necessarily heard in everyday life, voices that aren't already amplified. And today, I couldn't be more honoured and more excited to be introducing a close friend of mine, an incredible woman who has so much to share and is on a journey that you wouldn't often hear about, especially coming from an Asian background. But I'd like to introduce to you today Jenny Doan, a Guinness World Record holder, and she'll be sharing with you so much more on that, I'm sure. She is someone that is incredibly courageous to me, always breaking her boundaries, always living life outside of the box and still doing so, and always incredibly genuine in all of her interactions. And this has been Jenny since the moment that I met her. So I can't wait for you all as an audience to get to know Jenny a little bit. I know this is only going to cover a slither of her life, but Jenny has so much to share in the wisdom in the couple of decades that she's been here on Earth. So thank you for being with us today, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get started and dive deeper, I always have a very easy, quick question to lighten up the mood a little bit, because we are all about sparks and joy in what we do and what we experience. But what has made you smile this week?
This week. Spending time with my family. I moved to Melbourne about 2 years ago and my family is over in Perth. So for my birthday on the weekend, they flew over and treated me to an extraordinary weekend of delicious food and quality time.
Happy birthday, by the way. How old did you turn?
35.
If you don't mind me asking. Okay,
Yeah.
35. So you've got 3.5 decades of life experience. And I know in the 3.5 decades that you've been around, you've been all over the world, to say the least. And I think your journey in why you've got into different pockets of the world was what really drew me towards you. Like when we first met a year and a half, 2 years ago at a communication boot camp, which I think I don't always meet a lot of Asians doing. And I know that you weren't always surrounded by a lot of Asians or Asian women or Vietnamese culture. And a part of what you're doing now is to understand your heritage and your roots a little bit more. So take me back to little Jenny, who grew up in Perth. You've gone around to now be in Melbourne. So give us a little bit of an overview on how you've gotten here today.
Yeah, growing up I was quite a sheltered child. There's lots of photos of me cycling indoors, around the deli that my mum and dad used to work at. And you probably wouldn't recognise me today looking back at that little kid. And I think a big part of it was early on my older sister passing away. And so I was 12 at the time, she was 15. And at a very early age, I realised that nothing in life is guaranteed. That even if you just go along with your life, seemingly taking no risks at all, that these sudden things can come up and change your life forever. And while that was a really hard time for me, once I came out of that period of grief and depression, I realised that I couldn't explain why my sister was gone, but why I was still here. But I knew that I had to make the most of my life, to know that although I couldn't share it with her directly, that I could still go out and do all these incredible things. And that led me to first work interstate, working for the government, and then realising that a stable job wasn't really all it was cracked up to be. And that's when I did my first rebellious thing. 10 years ago, I quit my job and I went cycling.
That is very rebellious, especially as a woman and being Asian and Vietnamese as well.
Yeah, I called my mum from the hostel in New Zealand and said, I've quit my job and I'm going to go ride my bike to Auckland, which was 1,000 kilometres away. And she was like, why, Jenny? Why are you doing this? And I just said I wasn't happy. That the job that I was in for 3 years, getting promotions, working my way up, it sounded good on paper, but I felt like I wasn't living my dream. I felt like I was living the dreams of my parents and the expectations of what a good life was. But in my heart, I felt like that wasn't me. And I think that was my first attempt of getting out there and seeing the world differently, because I wasn't an athletic kid growing up. I was picked last in sport. I wasn't that coordinated.
Something we're going to touch on, because the fact that you said you're not athletic, and to see everything that you've not only achieved but attempted over the last decade, and what you're still trying to attempt now, which we'll definitely dive into deeper. But I just wanted to backtrack a little bit there, because one of the first things that you mentioned was around your family. And I think a lot of the audience, especially from, coming from cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, or even just being a person in general, our family has such a deep meaning to us in various different ways. And I can hear that your family experiences at such a young age would have impacted your decision-making process. And I'm sorry to hear about what happened with your sister as well, but I know when you shared it with me, and when you shared it as a story, when we did our boot camp together and we had that personal story to share, it's been a healing journey for you to understand what happened at a young age, but also to make meaning of that in driving a lot of your decisions now. And I really, really respect that about you, in that you are now taking the time to reflect on what has happened to you and what you can do with it moving forward. So I know you've mentioned, you moved away from home at such a young age, and you realised at such a young age, by the way, I know 35 can sound old to some people, but I'm like, there's still so many decades left. But you realised that it wasn't making you happy or fulfilled, even though you were so great at your job and you were doing the thing that your parents wanted you to do. How did the time from you being in your corporate job and doing what you felt like you needed to do to then now living life on your own terms, how did you go through that journey of actually making that decision to say, hey, I want to seek something else for myself, which might not be what my parents have known or what others would know?
Yeah, I think it was definitely being exposed to different ways of life. Because I guess with your upbringing, you don't choose who your family is, you don't choose where you're raised. But once you become an adult, you get to have a taste of all these different experiences and start to change what you realise are possibilities and realise that there are infinite paths.
What were some of those experiences?
So one of them was, before I quit that job, I did a volunteer assignment overseas where my job was safe, and that was the best option for me at the time, that I could try something, and if I didn't like it, I could go back to my job. And that volunteer assignment was in Tonga, an island in the Pacific, where work isn't your top priority. It's not even your third or fourth. It goes family, community, your religion, and then potentially work. And to me, that was mind-blowing, because we're so work-centric. And your rank and your salary and all that can be so closely tied to your identity. But once you remove all that and move to a place where you don't even see advertising telling you what you should and shouldn't do, that just totally changed my mind on a totally different way to live that wasn't right or wrong. It was just different. And I think being exposed to that made me question a lot of things. And that's where I got into cycling. It was a friend teaching me how to ride first 20 kilometers and then 40 and eventually 100. And I realized that there are so many things I thought about myself, like I'm bad at sport, but then I just hadn't discovered something that I liked. And you could apply that to any of those expectations you have for yourself. Like you could say, I'm not creative, but then have you tried different types of art or expression? And I think that exploration is where you start to discover yourself and meet people that reflect something back to you that you don't normally see. So our public speaking course, for a lot of people, public speaking is the most terrifying thing in the world.
More than death.
Yes, even more than death.
Statistically, yeah.
Yeah. And then getting on stage and meeting you and having other people hear your story. Yeah, so during our boot camp, I got to see a lot of things that I didn't realise were apparent. That my gift for storytelling was actually able to bring people to tears. And I just never noticed that. And if I had never tried that thing, I never would have found out, or it would have taken me much, much longer to discover that. But doing that little scary thing first and trying that thing ended up showing me something that I couldn't see by myself.
And there's so much more that we can dabble on when it comes to the path that you're on now. Because when I met you, it was, a year and a half, 2 years almost now. And I remember very specifically, you said to me, I don't really know too many Vietnamese or Asian people. And that was actually quite baffling to me because I've grown up in Melbourne and I used to grow up in a suburb where there weren't so many Vietnamese people. But then in high school, I was around, I don't know, 60, 70% of Vietnamese people. And so I've been quite in touch with my roots.
Yeah.
And when I heard you share your story, same as that mirror concept you spoke about, I think each time one of us shares our story, it makes others feel more courageous to then realize that their story is also worth sharing, and it actually makes others feel less alone. But in that, I've seen you over the last 2 years courageously pave your own path and lean into what you don't know, which is about your heritage, your ancestry, your Vietnamese roots, and what that has really instilled in you as a young girl, even during the time when you were away. But I'm sure your family still had so much an impact on you. So can you tell me a little bit more around how that journey has been? Because I know for a lot of us, if we come from Vietnamese backgrounds where we were born in Vietnam and we've moved to Australia, or we might be of Vietnamese heritage, but we live all around the world and we might not have as much connection. What has your experience been like over the last, say, 2 years and a bit in getting to understand your roots and heritage a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it's been a massive turning point because all through school I was the token Asian person in my class or in my friendship group. And there was quite a lot of rebellion in terms of not wanting to be Asian. Because I feel like growing up you had the stereotypes, like being good at math and being good at school. And while that was beneficial for my career, I felt like aspects of the culture that I didn't agree with, a lot of the, restraint around showing your emotions. And I used to envy my friends because they could talk openly with their parents about anything. Whereas for us, we were very, very reserved and we kept our feelings to ourselves. And over the last 2 years, since returning from the US, getting back in touch with my family and being the one to lead the conversation and actually saying things like, I'm crying right now in front of you because I trust you. And I had to come back to Australia because my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And that's one of those things where you hear that conversation and you immediately pack your bags. Wherever you are in the world, you go back and you make sure that you're there. Even if you can't do anything, directly to fix the situation, you're just there as support. And that was the first time where, as a family, we had to walk through that together and openly and share our emotions, because we could have been reverting back to our old patterns of feeling our emotions separately. But then that would just mean that we would be isolated and suffering alone. And so coming back to Australia and leading the way with telling my family, like, this is what I've learnt in my travel abroad and connecting with other people, that we have to do this together, that we can't hold into our feelings because that's not going to make things any better. And it's this trust that we had to build to be okay with letting each other see these emotions, the rawness of it.
The humanness.
Yeah. And I think for my parents, it was this fear that they would burden me, that I'm just a child, that I couldn't handle it. But I said, no. At the time I was 32. I was like,
still a child though, in your parents' eyes until you're 100.
Pretty much. And it was this idea that I went out into the world and did all these things and that I could bring back a gift to give them, that I had to go out and explore that on my own. And that they listened and they valued that, rather than assuming that their way was the right way, that there was more than one way to approach this. And I think that really taught me a lot about the resilience that came with their journey as immigrants and that path, and how that path changes and the new struggles that they come across. And I think seeing them as human beings and as people who I admire and look up to, it really it made me feel so proud that I was able to give them something to help make that time a little bit easier, a little bit lighter. And now that relationship has made anything, after that much, much easier, because we're not afraid to tell each other things. That even though it's uncomfortable or if it's painful or awkward, that we can handle it And that's what we need to feel safe, to feel okay with, you know, asking for help.
That is so powerful and so strong in how you've been able to handle that as well, Jenny. I definitely have been able to understand that at a deeper level now, so today more than ever, and I'm sorry for what you had to go through, but thank you for sharing so vulnerably. It's never easy to lose a loved one, let alone two of your loved ones. And what I've really noticed about your journey is you've gone out to find your spark, so to say, you know, the thing that lights you up, the thing that brings you joy. Maybe something that your parents weren't able to offer you in terms of their experience, because they were living under different circumstances. And what I've seen in your journey, and I think a lot of us can also resonate with, is that it is really scary to step outside of what our parents want us to do, and what would please them and what would keep them feeling okay and safe, because that's all they've known. But it's also so beautiful for you to be able to now witness your parents as humans who are also living life for the first time ever. And although it must have been very challenging, I think both for yourself and your family, to see you leave the nest during, you know, a time where it's your mum was there and your dad and your brother was still there. I know you're the older sibling also. And so that responsibility and that burden of wanting to be there for the family can almost deter you from making decisions for yourself. So that journey that you've been on, and to go full circle almost, although you had to come back to Australia under very challenging circumstances, you brought back a gift of the healing and the growth and the awareness that you've been able to bring back to share with your family, because they don't know what they don't know. And now you're coming back with a lens of compassion for your experience, but also for them and what they've experienced. And I can see that that's really bridged your relationship with your mum, your brother, and to meet them where they are now. And these are conversations that I know for myself, and even amongst my own groups and for those that I've spoken to, coming from a culturally diverse background, it's not always been openly spoken about. Our emotional challenges, like even saying I love you, is so hard for me, and I don't understand why. Well, I now understand it a little bit more, but the love language has always been my mum cuts me fruits, or she tells me to put on my jacket, or, you know, they do everything to keep you safe and make sure that you aren't going to be without food or shelter. And I completely am so grateful for that. So I think being able to now realize that the gift that you're able to give your parents is a different perspective for life, and to see you go out and pave your own path. And it might not be as linear as I get a corporate job and I make hundreds and thousands or millions of dollars and I look like I'm achieving so much, but there's actually something else that also makes life feel so fulfilling. And so that non-linear path of yours, I know, has gotten you to win Guinness World Records. For the listeners here, did you want to share a little bit about how that came about? Because you are not the stereotypical woman or person that I've ever met. You've done some very, almost not very human things, like things that people don't really think about. So if you want to share a little bit of your journey and why you went for the Guinness World Record and what that has really given you, because I know now you have a platform to share your experiences. So tell us and share us a little bit about that mindset that led you.
Yeah, so I hold the Guinness World Record for hula hooping 100 hours. 100. So 4 days and 4 hours plus 2 other records.
So you can Google this and you'll see her.
It gets stranger the more you think about it. But the reason I did that was because I randomly found a hula hooping station at a night at the museum. This was in 2014. And I did a class about hula hooping, but it was dance related, and I'm not much of a dancer. But I Googled the record. I asked, what's the longest a human being could possibly hula hoop for? And at the time, the record was 75 hours. And when I saw the video, I thought, I could beat that. But at the time, I had no reference point as to how I would possibly do it.
But why? Why did you just look at that and say, I just want to beat it? Like, why?
I think there's like a challenge aspect in my personality that I guess during school it was to get the highest grade. And that was just, I assume that was just my upbringing, that's what was expected of me. But when I see a challenge and I lock onto it, the curiosity in me keeps poking at it. Like, it has to be possible. Like, what's to stop me from being where I am now versus that thing that I want? And at that time, I wasn't really doing much in terms of physical endurance, and that's when I quit my job and went cycling. And so that was this random detour that just took me across 20-something countries, and I realized that I love endurance because you don't have to be the fastest, you don't have to be the strongest, you just have to keep going. Even if it's crawling, even if it's not great, if you keep going, then you'll eventually get there.
It was all in
yeah,
the mind.
It was in the mind. And I wanted to go for this record, and I had this kind of tug of war. The logical part of my brain said, that's silly, there's no money in it, it's going to be painful, why do you want this? And the other side of my brain said, I don't care, I still want it. And I ended up, like 5 years later, moving to the US, and it's the land of opportunity. They say, if you want to do something, there's a way. And that's when I decided to go for the record. Because if you want to hula hoop for 100 hours, somebody wants to see it. So I did it in a bar in Chicago. I brought an inflatable mattress in. My housemates were there looking after me, and I just kept going. And it's crazy to say it out loud, like 100 hours, but then I remember how I felt during it. And to me, hula hooping is just zen, because you have to be in sync with the hoop. You can't brute force it. You can't, if you lock your arms up, it's not going to make you a better hula hooper. You literally have to relax. And I guess with a hula hoop, you literally need to let it go, that you are just moving with it. And there's just this beautiful way that your whole body slows down. Your shoulders relax, your breathing relaxes. And each hour, there was just incremental challenges as you go. And then just realizing that whenever you have a challenge, there are people there to help you. Whether that's my housemates keeping me awake, keeping me sane, whether that was people helping me with first aid, all these little things that came together to make it possible. And that when you want to do something that sounds crazy, when you say it out loud, you expect sometimes criticism, but it doesn't actually come up. It might, but very rarely is it as bad as it is in your head. And I had to see that for myself, to realize that the things that you want to do, even if they make sense to nobody else, if you want to do it, just start.
And how has that lesson from the mindset that has gotten you the Guinness World Records, because not many people think about going for these, records because they want to challenge their mind, and I completely can see your mind has been trained almost from such a young age. You're getting amazing grades and being that perfect daughter and student, and you are someone that embodies the A+ at maths, A+ at science. Like, you've got that beautiful mind to really excel academically. And then you were able to put that into like a hobby. Yeah. And I know that since then you've been able to sit down and reflect on all your learnings to see, okay, so I did all these things and I broke all these records. How is that something that you are now able to share with women or, just people in general who are looking at doing things that might not seem like it makes so much sense to others, because it's so hard to break out of the mold, and it's so hard to feel like we're disappointing, our parents or society, or even ourselves, to think that this is what I wanted to do, but is there something different? And I think a lot of people come to a certain stage where they might have those thoughts. Yeah. And sometimes those thoughts might go away, but sometimes they linger and they fester for a really, really long time. So in the journey that you've had, what has been that key learning that you want to pass on to others that would really help them to make a decision that's for themselves?
Yeah, I think the big one for me was realizing that my logical mind was very powerful, but that it could also get in my own way, where we can have these big dreams and ideas, and then our logical mind can come in and then just scale everything back. Try and be more reasonable, try and be more practical, and really dilute things. And I feel like when we dilute our goals and we're not passionate about them, we don't really have the drive, because we've diluted it so much that it doesn't feel like anything important. And so for me, it was trusting that my gut, the thing that was telling me I wanted this thing, was real. and to listen to that and to use my logical brain to execute the strategy to do it rather than to dampen the idea itself. And I think for us, getting out there and going against the grain can feel so much, I think, more rebellious than some of my like Australian friends who came from Western backgrounds who didn't feel that sort of resistance, that to them it wasn't rebellious to go against the grain for what their parents expected of them. And I think for me, it was this realization that my parents broke the mold when they left Vietnam. They broke the mold, they started their own business. They did all these things that seemed impossible at the time, but they had this sort of desire for it that maybe they didn't have words for. And I think rather than waiting to rationalize, why you want it, sometimes just doing it, and then in hindsight you can figure out why you wanted to do it. And I think that with the Guinness World Records and all that, at the time I knew I wanted it, and even now I don't know why. I have 1,000 explanations every time I think about it. But I think that little spark in you is you knowing yourself, you trusting your gut, and listening to that, even if other people think it's crazy.
And why is knowing yourself so important?
I guess it's because there's so many opportunities out there. And if you don't really know what you want and what you desire and what you value, it's very easy to fall into what other people want and what other people want you to do. And it might not be explicit, it might just be, peer pressure or just following what other people are doing to try and fit in. And I think at the end of the day, if we continue to do that, we might achieve goals, but when they're not our goals, it just won't feel as good as something that you deeply desire and value.
So reflecting back now, you've had hindsight to think about the journey that you've been on. Has there been anything that you've regretted doing or not doing?
I think I've kept a journal for the last 20 years.
That's incredible.
And when I read back on it, I do regret how critical I was with myself, how impatient I was, how much criticism I put on myself, when a lot of the time I was still learning, I was still figuring things out. And the biggest lesson that I've learned this year was to hold on to the things you want, but to let go of the rigid timelines that you have for things. Because I think sometimes that gets in the way more than anything. Wanting this thing right now in this way, when it could end up going down a different route altogether, or your goal might end up morphing into something else completely different. So I think that, if I were just kinder to myself and gave myself the patience and the compassion that I would have given to a friend or a family member, I think I would have struggled less. But overall, all of the crazy things I did, I would 100% do it again.
Sorry, Mom. But it's probably very relatable for a lot of people who are very goal oriented. Like, we have these goals that we set for ourselves, long-term, medium, and short goals as well, and then we put in our actions to get there, and I think that gets us very far. But at the same time, like what you said, it can be a very rigid time frame, and we can be pushing ourselves towards something without really enjoying the journey. And I guess that's why there's quotes around, you can have these goals and you can be ambitious and you can look far into the future, but don't forget to be present and enjoy that journey, because your goalposts can change and you can change as a person as well. And I think that's why the non-linear path and that whole finding your joy and figuring out what sparks you really is important whilst you're on that journey. And I know that you are on such a different part of your journey now, and I can see that you are glowing and you are lit up. And I guess that's because of the decisions that you've made over the last 2 years or so since you've moved to Melbourne. I want to just touch really quickly before we wrap up on the book that you're writing, because I think this says a lot about who you are. And the book is all about the spreadsheets that you've been able to create to make decisions. And that goes back to your logical side. So if you want to touch on that really quickly, why you've decided to write this book on the journey that you are in now, because you're not at that tail end of your results and you haven't gotten to exactly where it is that you're getting towards. You are now in the thick of the next chapter of your life. So why the book?
Yeah, The Spreadsheet Said So is the title of the book. And it was because whenever something came up in life that I wanted to tackle, that was the first thing that I did. And so I was a data analyst for the past 10 or so years. And it was just a way of getting all of my thoughts out of my head and onto a screen and just sorting through things. And it ranged from the Guinness World Records, getting my finances in order, moving countries. And each time it was a similar sort of problem, but I would get better as I went. And I think it's just a different way of seeing the world. And so many of us use spreadsheets in our work, but if it's good enough to run a business or, when I was working at Uber, it was pretty much used in every aspect of the job. So if it's good enough for, a tech company, why not use it in your own life?
We are our own, CEO of our lives, right? So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think it reflects a lot of the ideas I had back then and the hindsight that I have looking back on it. All of the things that I learned along the way and the lessons that are universal. The concerns we have with our lives, if we're living life to the fullest, what are other ways we could do things? And it just challenged a lot of ways that I used to think and then now I see differently. And the book is just about that journey, those adventures, and how we can make things easier. Getting from point A to point B, getting out of the weeds sometimes. And when I set my mind to something and create a spreadsheet, if the spreadsheet says it's possible, then we're going to go and do it.
It taps into the logical side. And I think that will tap into, all those who are left-brained.
Oh, yeah.
Is it left-brained? Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jenny. And I really, really look forward to reading your book because I have never met anyone that creates spreadsheets to then make decisions for their lives. And it makes a lot of sense because we do use it in businesses now that you say that, right? And some of us better than others. But to have the record, that's your data background coming into play. It's been incredible to be your friend, to meet you at a point where you were just diving into the unknown and trying something new. And I know how challenging it can be for even myself to make a decision to try something new because our little voice, our logical side can always be like, oh, but I can be spending that time, doing some professional development to, I don't know, make more money or climb the ladder or, build my business. But trying something new so out of your comfort zone can then create connections or take you on a path that you've never known before. And what I would love for you to share with the listeners is that, you've gone to so many points in your life where you've achieved your goals, goals that others can't even imagine to achieve. And I remember when we caught up recently, you told me that it's now one of those parts in your life journey where you don't know exactly what that huge goal is. And sometimes I think we feel compelled to have those huge, hard, lofty goals that really push us, especially for people who like to have challenges that are outside of the norm, almost Mount Everest size. But I guess that fills you. And so right now, whilst you're in the thick of it and you are journeying through this book writing process and you're figuring out what that next big step is for you, I think that's so relatable because sometimes we don't always have that huge goal, and a lot of us feel like I need to have that huge purpose or I need to have that dream. And that's a lot of responsibility and burden and stress to put on ourselves. So whilst you're in the thick of it, can you share with the listeners the key piece of advice that you would pass on to them for someone that isn't going to necessarily be on a linear journey? Because our lives aren't linear. They're very non-linear, to be honest. So what's that key piece of advice that you can share from being here for 35 years on planet Earth?
I think the biggest one for me is looking back at all of the biggest opportunities I've had. It was never anything that was planned. It was the right place at the right time. And while that might seem unfair because you're like, how do we optimize to be in the right place at the right time?
Optimize it.
I realized that it was being around either people or places where you feel most like you, where you feel you can speak freely, where you can express yourself, and naturally your talents will rise. Your gifts that you get to hone will naturally come to the surface. And I think that's been the most important part because sometimes I can be a bit of a hermit and want to, stay in my little cave. But coming out and meeting people that I connect with and being out in the world, that's where the opportunities lie. And I think finding those people that can bring you those opportunities or help you see things from a different perspective, I think that's probably the biggest game changer. And
the mirrors that you're talking about.
Yeah. And so I think in instances where if you feel insincere going to networking events, then maybe that's not your vibe. Maybe it's a different type of networking group or a different community. And I think finding that community, I think, makes the biggest difference, personal, professional, in any aspect of your life. So that would be, my biggest tip.
Thank you, Jenny. I love that. I love that you ended it with community as well, because this is what it's all about. Like, this is a podcast where we are having one-on-one conversations, but it's being shared with a wider community, either Vietnamese women, cultural women, or just people in general. Like, we are all part of a web, I like to call it, and connection is what makes humans thrive. And through stories, we get to share bits and pieces of our humanness, and that we aren't all just one person experiencing one thing for the first time ever. And that's what this is all about. It's about making sure that the voices and the stories that need to be heard are being heard. And if others really resonate with parts of what you've shared, your journey in, going overseas to work, breaking records, breaking out of the mold, bringing back, these learnings and lessons back home to your family, coming back to your roots as well, and sharing and being vulnerable, which is so hard. I know there's so much more that we could have touched on today, because you have many pages in your book to share with the listeners and the community. But where can they find you? I know you've got a website, you've got social media, and you are a speaker as well. So please share with the audience where we can connect with you further if they wanted to ask you any questions or connect.
So the Jenny Doan on Instagram and on TikTok as well, and my website jennydoan.com.au. And I'm based in Melbourne and do public speaking in schools and at events, and of course hula hoop workshops if anyone would like to learn. And I'm available if anyone wants to book workshops or have a guest speaker. And I'm excited to get the word out there and share my love for life with others.
Yes, and I'm excited to have the listeners get to know you better as well. Thank you so much, Jenny, for making the time today on a Friday afternoon to be here to share your incredible story. And I honestly can't wait to read your book, because I've never read anything about spreadsheets. And also just to stay connected and follow your journey, because I know you've got so much more in there, and you don't do things that are linear. So I feel so inspired by that myself. So thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
And I look forward to staying in contact and connection with you.
My pleasure.